right. Thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm very excited to introduce you to our podcast expert, Gabe Castro. Gabe is a Philadelphia-based Latinx multimedia creator. She works in public access television and is also the producer and co-host of Ghouls Next Door, a media analysis podcast that dives into the horror genre, where they review horror media and discuss the history and psychology behind our fears. She also hosts Black Tribbles, which is a geek-talk radio show featuring BIPOC hosts. So now I'm going to go ahead and hand things over to Gabe.
Thank you. Yes, thanks for that introduction. So I am Gabe Castro. I use she, her pronouns, and I have been podcasting my own show for 3 years and over 3 years now. And am recently, from last year, started with the Black Tribbles, which have been around for 10 years. We're closing out 10 years next month with some really exciting things that I'll plug at the end. But I've been doing this for a long time and also teach and help community members in Philadelphia at PhillyCam, the Community Access Center. So helping people create media is kind of my job. So I'm really happy to be able to present for you all. And like I said, please drop your any comments or questions in chat. And if I'm not going to cover it in the presentation, I'll be able to do so there. But I will go ahead and start sharing my screen. All right, present. Cool. So this workshop will be specifically about kind of thinking of your podcast idea. There'll be a little bit about the technical aspects, but given, kind of the state of the world, they're leaning closer to remote podcasting. And so the idea of like what you would need if you wanted to start a podcast right now and affordably, so that you're not, breaking the bank to make this content that means something to you. But I will be focusing, primarily on kind of developing that idea and how to get the most out of the content that you're creating so that you're, don't feel like you're doing all this work and not getting anything out of it. So like I said, and as was introduced, I'm the producer and host of Ghouls Next Door, which is a media analysis podcast about horror. It's been going on for over 3 years. The Black Tribbles is a geek talk radio show with other BIPOC hosts like myself, and the programming and production coordinator at PhillyCam, which is the Philadelphia public access TV and radio station. So anyone who's interested in that, you can always reach out to me and I can give you some information so you can create content that will go onto our TV or radio station, or both, like mine does. Right? So I'll go over what a podcast is. If you have like no understanding of what they are, it's super simple, and it is a really great tool to enhance content that you're already creating, or is it just a really good way to get information out there and offer guidance or intel that you might have. Right. So the primary difference between a podcast and radio content is podcasts are edited. They are kind of like an audio-based blog. You record the content, you might then edit it together, including sound effects or interviews that happened in other sessions, and there's specific links. Whereas radio programs are produced live, they broadcast over airwaves in specific locations and are limited. That's not to say that radio shows cannot be uploaded later to be digested as podcasts. The Black Tribbles do that, but podcasts are specifically based where you're going to catch them online. They're available anytime. You do premiere, like you have like a weekly or bi-monthly, whatever it is that you decide as far as frequency, but it'll be available online and then ideally all the time after that, whereas a radio program might just be available that one time. One of the biggest things that's a difference between the podcast and a radio program is that radio stations have rights to the music that they play. So they're under like FCC licensing, and they have this kind of catch-all license that allows them to play popular music. Podcasts do not have that. So anytime you are going to include music on your podcast, you need to have the rights and clearances to use that music. To get that, you could contact the person who owns the music and then get them to sign a materials release that allows you to use it on your program. Otherwise, you might, get flagged or catch an email that says you need to pay us a lot of money to use this song. So definitely try to use songs that you only have the rights to. There's a myth that goes around quite often about, oh, if I only use it for a few seconds, then it's fine. That's not real. It still counts. Any amount of seconds is not allowed unless you have explicit permission. So that's one of the biggest things. If you want to be like a podcast about music, you got to get those rights, or you're just kind of talking about the music itself and not playing it. One of the biggest things to do when you first start out thinking of your podcast idea is to listen to podcasts. There's quite a lot. It's a big environment right now for that. Pretty much anyone can create a podcast. There's, no gatekeeping, right? But it's important to kind of look into other podcasts that might be similar to what you are thinking of. Want to kind of understand the flow of how content is presented, but also to think how you can make yours unique and stand out. If someone were to look up the topic that you're going to cover and they see you in those other podcasts, what makes them want to select yours over theirs? And also, like, does it make sense in that medium? Is this what people are coming and looking for, right? If they're coming for the daily, they want short little snippets every day of things that are going on. If you're going to do something like that, you probably don't want like hour-plus programming. That's a lot of work, and people are not here to look for that. So thinking about, what other podcasts you are being influenced by can really help with the kind of idea designing. So when you think of these podcasts, think about the trends that you're seeing with them, as well as what you are bringing that's unique to it. These are just some very diverse podcast ideas that like I listen to, that vary in length, in frequency, and the topics that they cover, but they're very unique anyway. Like if you go to find a history podcast, there are no podcasts that are like Stuff You Missed in History Class. If you go to find an improvised radio drama, there's not going to be another one that's anything like Mission is X. And if you want to go to that chat, like popular culture, you're going to get a very unique point of view from the read. It's just how it's going to go. So that's what you want to think about, is finding podcasts that are similar to yours, but think about what it is about this podcast that could be unique. And one of the biggest parts of that is yourself. You are going to bring point of view that is greatly going to impact the quality and the personality of this podcast. And so even if you pitched an idea and I was like, that's a cool idea, I'm going to take it, it's not going to be the same because I do not have the same history as you. I do not have the same information or background. And so you as the creator are an important part of the podcast itself. So thinking about how you can contribute to that and make this a unique perspective and really drive that home when you're creating your content is going to be really important in making it stand out from other shows. It's also asking yourself why anyone should trust you with this information. What do you bring to this table that is unique and that people should say, oh, they know what they're talking about and I value their opinion? And kind of asking yourself that ahead of time and weaving that into the work and weaving that into like the bio, if you're the host, is super important so that people have that credit to give you and will be trusting when they go to tune into your show. And if I'm going like super fast, let me know. A lot of things I want to cover, so I want to make sure I'm getting it. The other thing to think about, one of the most important things, is podcast formats. So what kind of podcast is it? There's a wide range, and what I have here isn't even the bulk of them. They're really kind of wide in range, and they also can be intersected. Like you can get, an interview podcast that's also educational, or an actual play podcast that's a narrative. Like it could happen. But these are kind of standard ones that you can already start to look at, like what do my ideas fall into? So an educational podcast would probably have, more of a script because you are providing very specific information and you want to make sure that you get all the details there. And so you would have to do that. So kind of off the cuff isn't really going to work with educational if you want to be, seen as valid with that demonstration. Scripted nonfiction, thinking of like serial the podcast serial having, a single theme for a full season. And even though it is nonfiction, it's still scripted because we have all of the information, and then we build the story from there. So even though you might have these interviews and you don't really know where the story is going, before you're publishing that show, you already have developed the entire story. So you're cutting out the pieces that matter and weaving the narrative that people are going to listen to. There's actual play podcasts, which are like people playing role-playing games, and will build out these stories and craft them together. So those wouldn't have scripts, but would be, they follow a specific type of rules. There are people who really like those. News formats can usually be something like a weekly or even daily production, which are updates on a specific industry. So if you are someone who works within a specific industry like business or media, technology, you can be updating people on what's going on in those worlds, kind of like, a newsletter that would go out, but vocal. Narrative, which are kind of like audio dramas, if you think of Orson Welles, right? You're creating a script and you're performing it. Usually these are very highly produced. One of the podcasts that I work on is called Black Women Are Scary, which features stories written by Black women that are usually scary or sci-fi, and they're performed. And then I do the audio design for those. So it's kind of like you're creating an audio soundscape because you're putting people into this world. So thinking if you want to do something like that, it takes a lot of scripting, it takes acting, it takes, audio creation of your soundscape, right? So really thinking of how much time that would take. And then there's interview podcasts where you invite people on about specific industries or topics and kind of have that rapport, usually having one or two regular hosts and then a person that's coming on to talk about a specific issue. And so that would be a little bit more of a looser look in the script format, where you would script out the intro of your guest and maybe have your questions prepped, but you still don't quite know what they're going to answer. So it's not fully scripted, but there is some structure to them. The other really important thing to think about is show frequency. So really think about how much time you have to dedicate to your podcast, because it does take quite a lot of work, even if you are, doing all the tips and tricks that I'm going to give you to, make content easy. It still takes quite a lot of time. One of the things that people often misunderstand about podcasts is, they think, oh, I hit record, I'm just talking, and then it's done. But there is quite a lot more that happens to that beforehand, with pre-production, getting all your ideas together, coordinating those interviews if you need to, and then editing that piece together so that it sounds good for your listeners. So thinking about how much time you can dedicate to the content to be able to submit it frequently. Also to think about how much time is needed for this content. So if you have a serial show, so if you want to, talk about one subject and explore it over 6 to 12 episodes that are going to air in the year, then you might take all the time to record all those episodes before you release it. So you would be seasonal. Some podcasts take a lot of time to create. So like Black Women Are Scary are a monthly podcast, because we have to record the acting, go over the script, then we have to create those soundscapes, and it takes a lot of time to develop each episode. And so it's a lot of okay, for monthly, every new month we get a new episode. And then there is bi-weekly, so you'd have every other week where you are submitting a new episode. And then if you are very diligent and you are probably recording more than one episode when you sit down to record, you can do something like a weekly podcast. I have a weekly show, and I'll tell you, it's a lot of work. It's definitely something that I had to build up to, and other podcasters I know had to have built up to it, because you have to really get into the flow of what your episodes are like. And I know of shows that are daily. I think that's crazy, but if that's something that makes sense to you and what you want to do, it's totally makes sense, right? Especially if it's something that's quick and it's related to that day, you want to be timely, then you can certainly do something that is daily. or if you think about like, it's okay that we're kind of taking our time. The one thing that I would say, if you're doing anything that is less than weekly, less frequent than weekly, like a monthly or seasonal, maybe even like bi-monthly, what have you, is to engage with your audience on social media while you're in between episodes. This is so that you stay on their radar so they don't forget you, right? Like, we didn't get a new episode this week, but let's talk more about this subject, right? Having, posts about the process, or just kind of keeping them engaged and keeping, you on their feed so that they are like, oh, right, that show, I can't wait for it to come out next month. It was so exciting. Or, the next season's coming around. Like, keeping them engaged so you don't lose those listeners each month because they fell off and forgot that you were creating content. So think about what works for you. There's no right or wrong answer. And you might find, that you adjust your frequency as it goes. The one thing I would say regarding frequency is that, like, whatever you tell people you're going to do, you have to do it. If you say every Tuesday I'm posting a new episode and you don't post one on a Tuesday, people are going to be upset, or they're just not going to trust you as a creator to give them what was promised. So if you're going to make any changes, you can let them know, right? Like on Monday, being like, sorry, I'm late. It's not going to come out till later this week. They'll be understanding. But if you say you're going to do it, you got to do it. And sometimes that helps to keep you accountable, is knowing that there's people out there who are listening, because they will find you. They will, message you and be like, where's that new episode? You said it would be there, which is kind of nice to hear, but don't like tease them. Just create the content and then go with it, but also being honest with them. Thinking about how long your episodes are. So with podcasts, there again is no one answer. I do often get asked that, where they're like, how long does it have to be? It's as long as you think it should be. Consider, like I said, listening to other podcasts that are kind of similar to yours, because then you'll have an idea of like, how long are audiences that you're going to be tapping into willing to listen to this type of content? What are they looking for? And so some podcasts are like 15 minutes because they're like on the daily. So they're like, here's your quick 15-minute little chat, right? I think like Duolingo, or one of the language apps, has like a podcast, and it's like 15 minutes where it's like, here's your little lunch break of speaking Spanish to you. Totally fine. I've also seen programs that are 2 hours long. The Black Tribbles are 2 hours long. And that's because there's a lot that they're uncovering, and they have communication for listeners as well. So it's kind of like dialogue that is going. But it's, you can be anywhere in between that. The Ghouls Next Door is an hour, whereas Black Women Are Scary are oftentimes just 20 minutes, because that's all that the length of the program is, the script that we're creating. And so think about what it is that you're creating and how much time you need to tell the story that you need to. Try not to drag it on. And if you have a script, it can really help you stick to it. I will say, if you're wavering between like two drastic different types of lengths, people are going to be really confused on what to expect, and you might lose listeners for that. So if you're going to be 15 minutes, then you can be around 15 minutes, like give or take 5, but you can't be 15 minutes this week and then be an hour and a half next week, unless you're like, every other week we do a full hour and a half program and a 15-minute program in the weeks in between to just have a little bonus. But you have to communicate that. It can't be like all over the place, because people will be really confused. Cool. As I mentioned, web marketing is super important when it comes to your podcast, right? Like that's where your audience is. Like, no one's really putting in that work for you. It's all going to be you or your team that is creating the content and letting people know where you are. It is pretty competitive on Apple Podcasts. Like I said, pretty much everyone can create a podcast, and almost everyone is. So thinking about how yours stands out, and then also connecting to the social community so that they know that you're out there, and keeping them engaged and interested, and like building a community, not just an audience. with social media, our like listeners and viewers now have a connection to content creators that we didn't have previously. And so they get a little more invested when they can have a conversation or they can feel like their thoughts are coming across. And then they'll be more willing to share your content and like, you know, drag other people into these groups. So there's a few ways that you can use social media to the best of your ability to get people engaged. One of the most important things to do before you just set up a bunch of social media is to think about who your audience is and where they are. So if you are, you know, catering to a very young audience, then you probably don't want to be on, honestly, Facebook. Very, you know, like Gen Zs are not on Facebook really. They're going to be on Instagram or TikTok. And so if you're going to talk to them, you want to go where they are. And like, you know, older audiences tend to be on something like Facebook. I've seen people use Pinterest for specific audiences. So just think about where they are and then put in the work on that app that is going to be where they are, instead of spreading yourself too thin, because you really want to put your work into the social media. And so if you're hopping around to all these different channels and you see that one or two of these channels isn't really giving you any likes or shares, people are not there, they do not care, just get rid of it. Like, you can have it there, but you don't have to put as much attention into it. Just work on the ones that are gonna be the best for you and for your audience. Another thing to use for social media is, you know, having hashtags, obviously, but also tagging other creators so that you're getting noticed and you're being linked up to them. So I have a few tips for social media, but they're pretty brief because there's a lot to go into. But I'd say, you know, interacting with your fans, like I said, they can communicate with you and, you know, are, you know, invested in the content that you're creating. And so you can ask them questions. It's also helpful if you're kind of thinking, what do I want to cover this week? I have these two ideas, which one is worth my time? You could just poll and ask your audience, and then they will tell you directly, I want to hear about this. And that's a good way to not waste your time and also to know exactly what they want. And that's not to say like change all your ideas to cater to these people, but it is a good idea to kind of understand what they might be expecting. So you can ask for their opinions, you can ask for their comments, you can see what's working, what isn't working. It's also helpful, even though your podcast, if you're posting on like social media or something, create photo posts, because that's what goes on Instagram. You can also create little audiograms using specific websites. So if you take a little bite of your audio, you can make a waveform video or just make an image of a quote from the event. Maybe you post photos of the person you're interviewing as a teaser, like, we're going to have this person on, it's going to be so great. I'm sure you've seen that. And then you get people hype and excited to listen to your episode, and they're engaged and they're excited about it. So it's more than just tuning in to your show, they're tuning into the community that you're building. And your social media can also be a way where you're offering exclusive content. So it's like, oh, you know, we only have 30 minutes to talk to this person on our podcast, but you can catch like a brief, like, you know, extra 10 minutes you didn't get to hear on the podcast interview with that person on Facebook. And it's only available there, or on YouTube, which you should definitely have a YouTube. Excellent. The other way to do that is partnerships. So joining forces with other content creators that are similar to yours. What's really great about something like Twitter and other social media platforms is that if you're like tagging other creators that you're working with, or you like, you know, want to share and say like, you know, I appreciate this person who's creating, you're tagging them, you're getting shown to that person's audience. And it's not like you're stealing them. You're just also now getting like access to them, right? So if you're going to have a brand or organization or person on your show, tagging them is super important. One, they're going to share it because they like that they're being, you know, advertised in this way. But then people are going to see, they're going to see, hey, I like that person. That person is on this show. I'm probably going to like that show. And then they're going to follow you. So you get that option and just kind of doing that. There's also really great ways with partnerships. If you're friends with other podcasts, right, is to, you know, switch between each other having like a little promo clip that you would play at the beginning. So like for Victims and Villains, which is a local Philadelphia podcast, they sometimes will play a little blurb of my show, and I will sometimes play a blurb of their show. And so we're crossing our audiences that way. On Twitter, you can also like tag like the things that you're talking about. I cover films, and oftentimes I will tag the film or the director, and I have gotten responses from those directors who are like, oh, I'm now listening to your episode about my content and I'm going to share it. And now all of a sudden other people are listening to it because it's something that they like. So make a list of brands or organizations that are similar to the content that you want to create or integral to it, and look at what they're doing. Look at who their audience is, and then see if there's a way that you can find some type of partnership, whether that's with a promo, getting them on your show, or even just tagging them in like, you know, a follow Friday. There's like a hashtag follow Friday. You can just be like, I listen to these people or I watch them, and they're going to share it. And now people know who you are. It's pretty great. Cool. Just checking along. Okay. These are some helpful tips for recording at home because it's safe right now. And I would, you know, prefer that people are being safe and still creating content. I think something that's very unique that's come out of these times is that people are understanding how much work goes into creating content and are understanding that it's totally okay to just focus on the content that you're creating and the information that you're trying to share over like all the bells and whistles of production that we used to have. So as long as your audio is listenable, you know, you can understand it and you're getting it out there, I think that's the bare minimum of what you need, apart from like, what is this about, right? So some helpful tips for home recording, because it can be a challenge. One of the biggest things is space, finding a space that works for you and works for the audio, because, you know, you might be recording with like your headphones where it just has the little speaker on it. And you want to make sure you find a place that's not super echoey, which the room I'm in right now is kind of echoey. So I probably wouldn't like, you know, record unless I'm doing some dampening. But finding a place that's not so echoey, maybe also since we're recording at home, talk to the people who also live in your home if they can listen, you know, like obviously babies are probably not gonna be too caring, but think, okay, when is their nap time or when are they going to be asleep so I can record this, and find a place that's going to be away from that. Also thinking about your AC or your heat. If you're going to record in a place that there's an AC or like a heat of some sort, to put those on before you're going to shoot, you're going to record your content, and turn it off right before you do it. So in the summer, I have my AC unit and I will blast it up into my room. And then right before we record, I turn it off. We do the recording and then we bring it up because that sound will leak through into your footage. And even with certain editing software, it gives you a tinny sound when you try to remove noise like that. So even though it's possible, it doesn't sound good. So don't do it. Try to avoid it as much as you can. I have worked with audio recordings where people are putting like a towel or a blanket over their head and they're in their bathroom or their closet and they're recording with their microphone. We're not recording video, so it's totally okay for you to do that. And it actually sounds really great. So if that's what you have at your disposal, do it. It's totally fine to do that. The other thing I think is super important and people often forget is headphones. Please get headphones. Even if you're using just like earbuds, having headphones is a great way for you to like listen for any issues beforehand, but it also helps with feedback or like the echo. If you're working with something like Zoom and you don't have headphones, it's trying to minimize the echo and the sound, so you can sometimes get this really weird like in and out sound, and that's just not going to be great. So any type of headphones all the time. Again, you're not recording yourself visually, so it's not even an aesthetic thing. Like just wear headphones, and also instruct your guests if they're going to join you virtually in some kind of virtual studio to also wear headphones. It will really help you. And then My last super important thing here is to have backups. So if you're going to record on, like you're on a Zoom, luckily Zoom will record separate audio channels so you can have them as their own unique thing. But what I do when I record with myself and my co-host is we will be recording on, like we use StreamYard, which is a video recording streaming site, but we also record using an audio recorder on our computer. So I have a backup audio file. So if anything happens, especially when you're doing remote recording, like if internet issues are off, you might have like glitches in the recording. But if you're recording remotely on your own computer, then that audio recording will be totally fine, and you can use that as your primary source or just to have as a backup in case anything happens. So even if your person isn't using like a computer, there's voice memo or certain apps like that on your phone. So you can just have them be like, hey, please, record that. The only other thing I'll say, just looping back to headphones, is don't record the audio from AirPods. So those are, because of how they're communicating with the devices, they get really clunky and distorted. And when you're not talking, they're not really listening. And so then it takes a moment for them to come back on. And if you move them out of your ears, it knows and it'll cut you off. It's a whole problem. So hardwired headphones if you can, or you can use the AirPods, but don't use them to record the audio. It's just for the person to listen. Cool. So here are some just like, accessible microphones for you to use that are, somewhat affordable. The first ones I recommend are USB microphones. So these are microphones like the one I'm using now, where they plug in directly to your computer. So you can just bring up, an audio software on your computer, record straight to it, like GarageBand or something. And it's super simple. And a lot of people use them. There are some really reliable ones. I don't know how to pronounce it, but the 5-line is new, and I've already heard some really great things about it. The Samsung Q2U is actually both USB and XLR, which I'll explain in the next slide. So if you are like, I might want to, kind of amp up my game later. If you get the Samsung, you can do that. Audio-Technica, people really use that one. Rode and Blue Yeti, like those are like top tier podcasting microphones that people like usually go to. Like if you're going to Google, I need a podcast mic, those are the ones that are going to pop up. But if you can't afford those right now, because you're just starting out, this is coming out of your own pocket, don't feel like you have to like run and get like the fanciest microphone. You really don't. If you, again, are in your closet with your coat over and you have your little microphone from your iPhone headphones, that's going to work, because that's actually, there's pretty good audio from those headphones, to be honest. And as long as noise, it's going to sound crisp. These are just for fancy people, but they're here if you want to use them. The other type of microphone would be an XLR. So like I mentioned, the Samsung Q2U is both. With an XLR, you can't connect that to your computer. So you would have to have an audio interface, which you then would connect the microphones to, and then you can connect to your computer or to a device that would be recording the audio. The things about audio interfaces is that you would then be able to record separate, like a bunch of mics if you wanted, depending on the unit that you buy. So when we're allowed to be in person and it's safe, and you might have like your little podcast studio set up, then you might have 2 mics because you have a guest that comes in. And so they're sitting across from you and they have their mic set up, and it's all into your interface, which you can control each mic individually, and you can, some of them have sound effects and are cool, but that's it, sometime in the future if that's what you want to do. But these are some of the reliable ones. The Rode PodMic is literally designed for podcasting. That's the whole PodMic. Audio-Technica is also one of the more popular ones for that. But XLR is the cord that it's using. So it's not a USB that connects to your computer. It's like 3 prongs, and you got to stick it into a device. And since we are remote most of the time, oftentimes right now, again, please be safe, there are really great online options to record and get people to be on your show, which is awesome. Even when the world goes to somewhat normalcy, I will probably still use these remote options because sometimes it's hard to get people in the same room. Me and my co-host do not live in the same place. So it's not like it's sometimes going to be hard for us to get to each other's place to record something. Whereas with, one of these remote options, we can always be accessible. We just got to make the time. And it also opens up the time and accessibility for guests that might not be as accessible, right? So I have interviewed people who are across the country in different states, people in England or something. Like, you can interview anyone. You just coordinate the time, they join you remotely, and now you can get that super cool interview that wasn't going to be possible if you're using your audio interface in your room, right? So here's some of the cool options that I have found. And some of them there's even more developing because of what's happening in the world. So keep an eye out, and they're always improving because so many people are relying on it. So there's Ringer, which is pretty simple. It's $8 a month. People come in and you record your audio. Squadcast, there's the problem I had with it is that it's a limit of 4 people. And they also, depending on the plan, limit how much time you're recording. So my show is an hour and we're weekly. So 2 hours a month isn't going to cut it. But I would have to do the $17 a month. But what's cool about Squadcast and like Riverside is that they're both designed for podcasts. And so Squadcast and Riverside will also record on your computer and not over the internet, and it optimizes your audio. So it is specifically there with the intention of like people are recording podcasts. So it's going to work its best to relieve the background noise and make you have really crisp audio. And because it's recording to a computer and not over there, you are also getting away from the problems with connectivity issues. And then there's Zoom, which we're on. And like I said, it records video and audio separately. You can use the video to, promote it. Like, hey, here's a little clip of our person talking. This is so cool. You can record to Facebook like we're doing. So you can have more options if you do something with Zoom. And people are familiar with Zoom too, which is a bonus, especially now. So if you're like inviting a guest to come into Zoom, they're pretty familiar with this, whereas they might not be as comfortable with something like Squadcast. Riverside also has video options and is like designed for streaming. So it's like you can stream and can talk to your audience live. We, on both of my shows, the Black Tribbles and Ghouls Next Door, I actually use StreamYard, but they're primarily focused on video. But one of the cool things about it is, just like Riverside, is that if you're streaming live to YouTube and Facebook, Twitch, what have you, when people are commenting, you can see the comments, you can bring them up in the feed, and you can talk to your fans in live time. They're watching you, they're asking questions, you're answering them, and there's some engagement there that could be really fun, but only if it makes sense for what your show is. If you're just like, doing the daily and you don't want everyone to talk and chip in, then maybe don't do that. You can just air that program later. So one of the biggest things about podcasts is that they're edited, right? I always recommend, strongly recommend recording live to tape, which means you're recording as if you were live on air. So you're not a radio show, but you're pretending that you are. So you come in, you have the intro, the middle, like everything is just going exactly how you want it, and you don't record more than you need. So if my show is only half an hour, you don't want to record an hour of content unless you're going to break that up into 2 episodes. One of the biggest reasons for that is that it gets really sad when you have to cut out content that's not going to make it to the final cut. Also, it's a pain to edit out all that content and to think about what you want. So save yourself that problem and just record it, and what you get is what you get. And so it could really help with that. But oftentimes you do need to do a little bit of editing. Sometimes it's, you do your interviews and now you have to weave in your intro, or maybe you have sound effects or little interstitial things or commercials, what have you. And so if you want to edit your content, there's a super helpful app called Audacity that you can download. It's for Mac and PC. It's free and it is great for beginners. It's got the basics that you need. And because it's free and it's been around for a while, it has, like, if you have a question, there's a YouTube video about it. Like, there's several YouTube videos about it. Any question you have will be answered in Audacity, like on the internet somewhere. So if you just want to record, you can do that. That's what I use when I'm recording my audio separately. It's super free. Reaper is also free, but it's a little more intuitive. So if you want to like get into the nitty gritty of your editing, maybe you're doing sound design, then you could do something like Reaper. It's free technically. And then Adobe Audition is with the Adobe Suite. You can get, or the Creative Cloud, so you can record that. What's cool about Audition is if you're recording video content, is that if you're using Premiere, they interact with one another. And so from Premiere, you can be like, this audio is not good. I need to fix it up really nice. You can then open that audio in Audition, save it, and it saves in your Premiere file. So it's pretty fun. And there's also some tools in there that make editing really easy for beginners. Some like quick hacks and just like ways to change things. And there's also a lot of videos to help you figure out what you're doing. But you can also use something like GarageBand, which just comes on your computer, and you can record and have your different tracks. Super simple. The next step after you've edited, you've recorded, you've edited, now you're ready to put it onto the internet so that people can listen to it. You need a podcast hosting site. And so the host site will be where you upload your content. You have an RSS feed, which is how your podcast gets sent to what are called podcatchers. So that's like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Google, whatever it's called now, and things like that. So you need a hosting site, which is where you're going to update, you're going to upload your episode, fill out all the information about what it's about, and then send it to those places. So the first one I have here is Anchor. I use Anchor. It is free. It is super user-friendly. It is owned by Spotify, so you're guaranteed to be on Spotify. It also will send you automatically to like Apple and Pocket Cast, Overcast, I think is one of them, something like that. They send you to a bunch of places just inherently in the system. But Anchor also has the ability to record on their site. So you can go to create a new episode and just record right into their program. You can input, like you can have saved your little audio files. Like if you have an intro, you just drag that in, then record your interview, bam. You can put commercials in there. They also have a feature built in for sponsorship where people can click a button and then they can pay you because they want to support you. And you can also like have short sponsorship commercials that you interweave in there. And there's some limited podcast stats with Anchor. They're not super in depth. They give you the basics. So I use like other sites to get more in-depth stats. But if that's looking for, like, need all deets because we're financial support, so we need specifics, then Anchor might not be what you're looking for. But if you just want to kind of get it out there, it's free and it's super easy to use, and I use it, so just putting it out there. One of the ones that's super popular and it's been around since like forever for podcasts is Buzzsprout. Also super easy and user-friendly. They are always improving. Like I said, they've been here since 2009 and are building up. So kind of keeping your tab on for them. But what's also super helpful about them is that they create a blog and a newsletter that always has helpful tips of like, here's a new thing in the podcast community. And so I even subscribe to that, even though I don't use them as my hosting site, because it's super helpful and I learn things all of the time from them. They do have in-depth statistics that are more specific. They're easy to kind of just like put your stuff in there. And they have an affiliate marketing program. So like people can help, but you can also like use their site to find sponsorship opportunities. And I think one of the best things about Buzzsprout and reason why I've been considering switching is that they have built-in transcription integration. So you still have to pay for transcription, but transcription is super important. One, to make your content accessible, and you definitely want to do that, but also for SEO, because the internet, Google cannot scan audio for those keywords. But if you have it transcribed and you have those keywords written out, then Google can then find your stuff and recommend it to people. There's a free version of Buzzsprout, which will remove your episodes after 90 days, but you can pay, it's just $12 to start. And again, if you do the transcription, those pay, but it's more automated. So if you sign up to like add that to your plan, then every time you upload a new episode, you can get that transcribed and make it super accessible. Another one is Captivate, which is pretty new. They used to be called something else, and I actually had them way when they first started, and then they changed over to Captivate and super fancy. Captivate is for people who really want to heavily market their show. So if you're like, I need a marketing book and I need advanced analytics and a sponsorship kit, and I design the website using their website, Captivate's got it. They're really in depth with that, and they have a lot of really fancy things happening, and you can host there for $19 a month. And they also have like core plans, and what I like about them is like the basics like that you need don't change per like tier that you're paying for. It's just like each new tier has like a fancy thing attached to it, but you can still at least get the core aspects of them. And then once you've hosted your site, you probably want to know how good you're doing, and if people are listening and who's listening. Was I right about the audience that I thought, or did that experiment with that episode really work with my audience? So like I said, with Anchor, because it's limited, I use Chartable. Super easy to set up once you have your show, and it pulls the stats from Apple Podcast and Spotify, so that you can see like specific demographics. You can see how long people are listening to your episodes, what are the more popular ones. And so it's there to complement what I already know from Anchor. So I can see like, oh, people seem to really like when I had this series, I should probably revisit it. Or no one listened to this episode, or like 3 people and it was my mom, then I probably don't want to cover that topic anymore. And you can kind of get that understanding. You can also go straight to the source, so you can set up your account on podcastconnect.apple.com or podcasters.spotify.com, and they have the specific stats for those apps that people are listening on, and they tell you like the demographics, like what is the age group of people who are listening to you, what apps are they listening to you on, and what episodes do they like. So this is a good way to influence like what you're gonna like talk about, or to see like if things are working the way that you thought. One of the last things I will mention, and you're probably like, this is a lot of work, you keep telling me to do things, and I understand it's a lot of work, but you get what you put into it really with podcasting. And so I mentioned before that transcription is super important, and that's because of the way things are being searched. So if you are even just already writing up a script for what you're doing, why not post it in your blog so that people can read it later, and it can also become searchable. I also, in my own blog, if you're in reading it, you can at any time like use this link to go and listen to it, or go and watch us on YouTube, and we get those clicks, they count. And so it's just a good way to have your content accessible in another way, and just to be available somewhere else. And so having a blog is really great. And you can also have a blog when you're including content that maybe you're not covering in your episode, but is complementary to what you're covering in your episode. So if you cover other things, you can do that. Lindsay mentions that Anchor does not have a website integration. It doesn't. So I have a separate website. So I use Wix, but some people use like Squarespace, or they are, Anchor is now looking to partner with, totally blanking on WordPress. They've been sending out notices that you can set up a WordPress website and it'll integrate with your Anchor. But Captivate and Buzzsprout, I believe you can have your own website depending on the tier that you're paying for. Like I said, have a separate website, which is where I have all our episodes, have our blog, and we make videos all of that's there. If we sell merch, it's on our website, and it's just a good place to have, so that people can learn more about your show and also have other ways to get the information from your show. So just last minute helpful tapes, like I said, live to tape. Just really important is to really think about what the purpose is of your show, because you're going to spend a lot of time with this and you're going to need that. And it's also going to help when you're building that script and you're thinking about your plan of what you're going to cover is why. And that's going to help you drive the narrative that you want and also find the people that you need to interview or cover, and just be really purposeful. Like, you're putting things into the world. What are people leaving with? Are they leaving with a laugh? Are they leaving with education? Are you leaving them with, next steps so that they can make a difference? Personally, on my show, because we tend to cover some really heavy items, oftentimes we have links in our show notes for ways to help and make a difference towards whatever it is that we're covering. So you can have those things where you think, what do I want people to leave with that they didn't have before my show existed, and that they would be thankful for having now? And that will really drive you when sometimes the going gets tough and it gets really hard. You'll remember that you're putting something into the world that wasn't there before, and it'll help. The other thing is, I wish someone had told me this when I premiered a long time ago, but it is super helpful to have 3 to 5 episodes already done when you premiere, and maybe launch with 3. That way people can binge and get an idea of what your show is like. Because the first one's going to be rough. Totally understand that. You need to have a rough first episode so that when you get to 100, you're like, oh, this is so good. I'm so glad that we started there and now we're better, right? But having 3 episodes is a good idea, because then people can listen to them and be like, okay, I get the gist of what this show is, and I'm going to stay tuned and I'm going to subscribe. And having like 2 that are ready to go will help you with that buffer while you're getting into the flow of creating content regularly, so that you don't miss your deadlines and people aren't like, what's going on? I think something that's helpful is converting for YouTube. You don't need it, and it could be a little extra, but there are apps like it's called headliner.app, which is a website where you can upload your audio and you just like have your cover. You can type up what the episode is about on it, and then it'll export a video that has waveforms. The reason is that some people don't have like podcatchers, like they don't have Apple Podcasts on their phone, or they don't have Stitcher or Spotify. They don't care. They only are going to YouTube for content. I have fans who only listen to us on YouTube and only listen to the episodes that don't have visual content. So it's a thing. I was also surprised, but it could be another way for you to get people to listen. That, that's an audience that you can tap into. But if it's like too much work, I totally get it. You can work up to that. And then another thing I always suggest is joining a podcast group. Specifically here in Philadelphia, we got the Philadelphia Podcasting Society, which is a great way to kind of exchange information and get help. But it also is where we share and interact with each other. It's how I found people have come onto my show, or people who've supported me, and I support them. I'll edit for them. They edit for me. We give each other promos, all of that. The podcast hackers in the movement community. There's a podcast movement convention that happens every year. I think last year was virtual. I don't know what this year will be, but it's a way to kind of get in touch with other podcasters to ask those questions before you get started, or ask while you're going, like, hey, can anyone help me? I do suggest like searching the group with like the keywords first, because honestly, someone has probably already asked some of the basic questions already, so you can kind of find those answers beforehand. But don't feel shy. Definitely reach out to them and learn more. And that is my presentation. So any questions?
Yeah, thank you so much, Gabe. That was awesome. Very thorough, very informative. I can tell you do this a lot.
Yes. Yeah, you can, it was shared in the chat. You can check out my show. Even if you don't like horror as a genre, it's honestly just there as an educational tool. So you can learn how media itself can be used as a coping mechanism in a way to learn more about what media is being created. And you can check out the Black Tribbles. We're going to be live tonight. So if you want to see how we use StreamYard to interact with our listeners in real time, you can tune in on YouTube. We're live at 9 p.m. so I'll be up pretty late. And like I said, we're closing out. So I wanted to do just a little bit of a shameless plug that we're going for the Guinness World Record of longest live podcast of 60 hours straight next month. So please check us out. Definitely tune in April 16th through 18th. We're going to be doing podcasting for 3 days. So
all right. Well, thank you so much. Does anyone have any questions before
I want to ask real quick? I love asking people this. Like, if you could go back to when you first started, what is something that you know now that you could tell the you then?
Yes, there's a lot that I would say. There's a lot that I've learned. But some of the bigger things would be to remember the third person in the room. So I have me and my co-host, and this idea that like your listener is the third person. So me and my co-host are best friends, and so we might have a lot of like inside jokes, or we have like, you know, an understanding that only we would get. And being conscious of the fact that there's people who are listening to this conversation helps me be more informed when I present information. So it's like, okay, we're not going to make little jokes between ourselves, because if you've ever been that third wheel friend that's just like, oh, okay, that's awkward, you're talking about high school and I wasn't there, right? So you want to have that added information, and also like understanding that the listeners aren't like your friends, right? Like they're not going to be there just to listen to you laugh and geek out with your friends. And like, don't just laugh on your show. My first episode is erased from the internet because it's so bad, because it's just like us laughing and talking for forever, and really learning that we wanted to be intentional about the content. And so scripting was really important. That's one thing I would say, and understanding that it is going to be a lot of work, and to expect that and prepare for it.
Oh, I'm doing 100 podcasts in 100 days. I'm on day 25 today, so.
Wow, nice. Exciting.
It is. I got a thing. I'm ranked like 175 in education, which I'm like, oh yeah, I have no idea what I'm doing. Like, yeah.
It's so exciting. Congrats.
Thank you. And I just wanted to say just one thing. So I loved your presentation. Thank you. It made me feel more confident. And then also I'm joining the Facebook groups as we speak.
Yes, get in there.
Something else I would say to people starting out is to focus on time when you're posting. So I was posting at 4 a.m. Because I looked it up and it said 4 a.m. was the best time. And I was getting triple the amount than if I would post at 8 a.m.
Yes. Yeah. Scheduling on social media is super important, especially if you're using Twitter. You don't want to post at 2 a.m. No one's there. It gets lost, right? As opposed to like Facebook, you can post anytime because it just gets, it just comes up all the time. There was a question in the chat about how much time per week it takes for my 1 hour podcast or a 1 hour podcast. It does depend on what the content is, because mine is a film review and also historical and psychological. We put a lot of work into our content. So there's like watching the content, and then developing our script takes quite a few hours. And then we also record video and audio. So editing and putting all the bells and whistles that we do takes quite a few hours. But when we started, I would say, you know, even separating the fact that we have to watch the content and like make our notes, it's still like 1 hour is still like quite a few hours of like the research and the editing at the end. So expect that, like, and that's for like pretty much any kind of content that you're doing. It's always going to be like 10 minutes of a short video. 10 minutes can take like a week to do. So.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Gabe, for doing this. And thank you everyone for coming.